now? Sorry, I'm probably shouting. Welcome to this afternoon's session of Australian Writers' Week, Comrades in Words. My name's Nicole Abadee, and today I am extremely lucky to be speaking to two of Australia's most loved writers and greatest thinkers. And has been an international bestseller, published in the UK, Germany, the US and Italy. The Sunday Times named it as one of the 25 best novels of 2020. Charlotte's writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, Literary Hub, the Sydney Morning Herald, Griffith Review and the Saturday Paper, amongst others. And in 2019, Charlotte was made a member of the Order of Australia, AM, for significant services to literature. Please make her welcome. Thank you. Christos Tsiolkas is a novelist, essayist, playwright and screenwriter, and librettist now as of this week. He's written 7 novels, including The Slap, Barracuda and Damascus. The Slap, in 2008, published in 2008, was an international bestseller, translated into 22 languages, and it won the overall Best Book in the Commonwealth Writers' Prize 2009. It won the Australian Literary Society Gold Medal, the 2009 Australian Book Awards Book of the Year, and was longlisted for the 2010 Man Booker Prize. The Slap and Barracuda were adapted into highly successful TV series. Christos' most recent novel, Damascus, won the 2019 Victorian Premier's Literary Award for Fiction. In November 2021, he won the prestigious Melbourne Prize for Literature for his outstanding body of work, contribution to Australian literature and to cultural and intellectual life, a huge honour. His work is also regularly published in The Guardian and The Monthly, and he's the film critic for the Saturday Paper. What a great gift that must be. Christos, welcome.
It's really great, thank you.
So the title of this session is Comrades in Words. I'd like to start by asking you both about how you first met and became friends. Charlotte, your version.
Well, I can start that because I remember very clearly when can I first say it's so amazing to be here. The last festival I did was here 2 years ago and I went back home and then everything collapsed. So it's so amazing to see people. Thank you for coming. I met Christos in the company of our mutual dear friend and publisher Jane Polfreman. And Jane said to me, come and have a drink with my friend Christos. And we were in Melbourne, and I said, okay. And I was terrified of meeting Christos because he had this reputation as being very, you know,
Horrible.
no, not at all. You know, this savage social critique, and I thought he's going to think I'm just a prissy little straight white, you know, idiot. And I met him, and he threw his arms around me and hugged me. And anyone who knows Christos knows his incredible, huge bear hugs. And I thought, oh, he's just like my little brother. So, and I loved him ever since.
Christos, what do you remember about first meeting Charlotte?
Yeah, well, Jane Polfram, Jane Polfram, because this is about friendship, right, and the literary world. Was part of the falling in love with you, Charlotte, because you know how I feel about all your work.
Stuff out and hopefully made quite a coherent collection. I didn't want to do this a collection of all kinds of different stuff that I'd written and put them together.
So that's how it came about. So there we go. Christos, your book 7.5, you describe it, or the character in the book called Christos describes it at one point as being part memoir, part fiction. It's about a 50-something Greek Australian writer called Christos and his mid
auto fiction, but I was for the last, I guess I'm going to say now the last decade, I've been doing this exercise, which is part of what you talk about in your solution, I think, to kind of the work we do to try to understand the inner life, the imaginative life, and I wrote a monograph on Patrick White because it came out of a year of I just thought I'm going to read all of Patrick White because it felt like there was enormous gap in my reading that I had never read all of White's writing. And then I just found that ferociously important in terms of inspiration. And then I did that year after Patrick White, I did all of Virginia Woolf, who was another writer who I felt kind of silly that I hadn't read more of. And that too, I mean, I just discovered The Waves was one of the finest works in the English language in that year. And then I did the next year Jean Genet, and the book begins with a quote from Genet, who I had read because he was really important to me as a queer writer coming out, and discovering something beautiful that I had first read and something frightening that I'd first read when I was a late teen, a young adult, and also realising how astonishing his craft was. So what I'm trying to say, Nicole, is that I think I was engaging with the modernists. When I think about those three writers and reading them, that's, White, Virginia Woolf, Jean Genet, they're modernist writers, and they didn't have the word autofiction back then, but you can't read Genet without his life, the details of his life, an element of autobiography being in the reading, but he's telling you at every point, I'm a traitor. I'm playing. Do not trust me. This is this is why I'm doing fiction. So that I haven't thought about it quite clearly as that, but I think that must have inspired the writing of 7.5. Is that reading, and a little bit similar to you, Charlotte. I had been with my partner Wayne in the UK. We were going to celebrate 35 years. We were only there a week before the world went mad. We luckily because we travelled with we booked with a travel agent who saved us. He got us a flight out, went straight into quarantine. I was working on a novel called Resentment, which is, I think, me trying to be the scary Christos you were referring to, me being too hyper-conscious of what I should be writing, and it was dead on the page, and you've talked about this. And then I just thought, I'm in quarantine, the world has changed, I'm just going to need to do an exercise as a writer, and I started writing 7.5.
Both?
Daily, every day.
And I read that you set yourself a task of writing 800 words a day.
At least, yeah.
Yeah.
But taking Sundays off, and that had come out of Damascus, because I think I learned through that book that there is actually something really wise in ancient wisdoms, and I do think you need
a day of rest.
Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about
the artistic, creative life. You've talked a little bit, Charlotte, about the inner life and how important it is to you, and there's a lot about that in that first essay, Fertile Ground. Something that both of you talk about in these books is the idea of home. It seemed to me to be quite an important concept, especially in your book, Christos, and I wondered to what extent, for both of you, your writing life provides a home to which you can retreat from the world. Charlotte?
Yeah, I think it does feel like that to me, that one's writing is a home to go to, and I really like getting away from it. But if you're away too long from the work, you know, it's like a homesickness, I think, that happens. And it is, I think of it as a place that I go to in my mind. It's a hard thing to define, but at first I thought you were going to talk about like a physical home, which is also really important.
Let's talk about that for a moment, because you say to write well, you need things to be in order in your physical home.
Yeah. And even then, it doesn't mean that you write well, but I need a sense of things are sort of in control. And and that's one of the reasons, like during the pandemic, that is obviously still going on, I couldn't write. We're supposed to be able to, I work at home anyway, I don't have children, I don't have elderly parents to worry about. I should be absolutely primed to just sit down and I couldn't, because I was so anxious. But that ordinarily, creating a sort of sense of physical order and sort of boundaries of time and space is really important to sink in. And in 7.5, when Christos, when you first think about his friend Andrea, she'll understand when I say, I can't see you, I'm working. That's quite a hard thing to do to people, but you sort of have to do it. And I think you learn over time that at first it's hard to hurt people's feelings, but after a while, I've realised I can't go and have coffee endlessly. And it's not the time that it takes to have the coffee. It's all the around time
and the
kind
break
of break
in
the break in the kind of dropping down into that quiet space.
Christos, what
about you? The idea of home is quite an important one, it seems to me, in 7.5. Is writing home for you?
Well, I think I've got so many things to say. I think that because I have such a clear image of being in Doha Airport, this is March 2020. Yeah, and the panic. I mean, suddenly history is. You suddenly realise you're in history, and we're a lucky generation. I'm a lucky generation that it's taken this long for me to feel that, and the absolute terror that you could see in the people wondering what's happening, what is this virus, how do I get home? And there was a young woman who was waiting for a flight to Lagos. She was, I don't know where her home was. She was on the phone, kind of distressed, speaking French, and just going, I want to go home, I want to go home, I want to go home. And I realised that home, I've been searching, wondering, questioning what home is all my life, it feels like, all my conscious life as in this place called Australia. And I realised it was home. It was whatever, and it was, so that I think is why that became so central to 7.5. I mean, Charlotte, there's a young person in my life who I adore, and she wants to make art her work. And I remember a few years ago giving her David Byrne's How Music Works, because that's an artist explaining the process of what you need to create in your life, to be a musician. And I said to Charlotte, when we're signing books, she's got to sign one for me to give to this young person, because she's struggling to find a way to create what you and I do, a home that is a place to work, that is sometimes having to be quite brutal and say, no, I can't see you, I am at work. And that took a long, long time for me to learn.
I think that's hard, especially in Australia, because,
you know, you sound like a wanker. when you haven't published anything, when you to say, no, I can't come for lunch because I'm making art, is, you know, we're not allowed to say that here. And I think that's a real shame, because we should be celebrating that and encouraging that rather than, but
so, yeah, the sooner, I kind of think maybe younger people are better at it than we were. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that's true, Charlotte. I mean, it is true. There is that sense that I am a, you know, I remember stumbling over the words "I am a writer." If someone asked what you did, it felt embarrassing. So I'm hoping that there is a cultural change.
I know, but then there is the kind of thing of, I also,
and this is a bad admission, but when someone who actually hasn't yet published something says, I'm a writer, I sort of think, well, we'll see. Which is mean. And
I'm just arguing the complete opposite of what I just said, but I don't know. I feel a bit puritanical about having to earn things too, and I bet you feel like that.
Christos, I liked your reference to David Burns, and it's something
that you talk about in your book, Charlotte, that you've learned a lot from talking to other artists, painters, sculptors, actors, musicians. I'd like to ask you both about that, how that helps talking to other artists. I'll start with you, Charlotte.
Yeah, I want to hear Christos about film, particularly.
I learn so much from visual artists, and in recent years, particularly painters. My partner runs an art transport business, which is a fantastic business, and so we've suddenly started acquiring a lot of paintings because half of the artists didn't have any money and would pay us in paintings, which is great. But also we never sell them, so, you know, it's not that great. But so having a lot of painters around us in our lives was wonderful, and I could start to hear the way that they would speak about paint, and I could sort of get something from that to teach me how to write fiction. You know, it's not that I want to learn how to paint, it's that their painting helps me write. And an example that I can point to recently is a wonderful artist, painter in Sydney called Jude Ray, whose work, the work that I really love of hers are still life pictures. And I asked her if I could interview her about still life, because the book that I'm writing now, I feel like is a kind of a still life. And I thought, how do you make a still life that has energy and movement within it, even though it looks sort of static? And she was so helpful to me, you know. She just said, oh, well, I do this and that, and I could, like, straight away just go, I know what to do, to take from her painting to put it in my writing, sort of structurally. It's so helpful.
Christos?
I was thinking, Charlotte, that one of the things that we have, and it is actually going right back to the first question of how we meet, like one of the things, it wasn't when we first met, but you've only, I mean, you know, you've only met my partner Wayne a handful of times. Really, I've met Sean only a handful of times, but you know, what can sometimes happen is, you know, they're ignored because people are looking over, you know, you and I have partners who, when we do feel like wankers saying I'm a writer, who go, no, this is what you do, and support us, right? Yeah. And I think that that's part of home. And Wayne's an amazing gardener, and that's something I've learned about how art works from watching him create this most astonishing, fabulous garden through house after house, you know, because we've been, you know, and I think Sean has a sense of the imagination and the art through the...
Yeah, and he's a musician
as
well.
So you're... And I know I'm kind of jumping back to a question, but I was thinking about what you said with young writers. I'm a writer, or I'm an artist, or I'm a musician. Sometimes I get frustrated. What I say is, of course, but you have to do the work, and it's work, and you have to take it seriously. But the other thing is, what's I think has enabled myself, I'll speak for me, to continue in this world doing this, are those relationships of our friends, of our partners. You know, this is something I owe to Jane Fulfilment, kind of who's taken a punt on me right from the get-go. And you will only find out if you're a musician, a writer, a visual artist by doing the work. But I worry sometimes that those relationships aren't being nourished, that people are always looking over their shoulder for who's going to, and I think...
I remember Christos launched a student
anthology in Sydney years and years ago, the UTS, creative writing anthology, which was a beautiful thing to do. And I remember you saying in that launch speech that if you are going to dedicate your life to this work,
first of all, the person you love has to believe that this is worth doing. Then you have to realise that you're not going to be able to live where you want to live. If you may not live in the groovy suburb where all your friends are hanging out. You have to give things up in order to create this life, because it's a very, very hard life. When you're here, it's a fantastic life. But in all the in-between bits, it can be really rugged, because it's only your self-belief and your work ethic and your ability to develop your talent and work at developing your talent that will keep you going. But the people you love are the ones who will really keep you going, who are not writers necessarily, but who believe in what you do. It's a really good thing to stress.
Well, I often say to the question to the relationship to the other arts. I mean, I've just come out of... I've loved working on this oratorio.
Tell us a bit about that, Christos.
So it's important, because this is the river here. 50 years ago, George Ian Ogilvie Duncan was murdered for being a pifter, basically, and they're a shocking hate crime. And actually, there's a lot of bodies and a lot of people who were bashed and killed. And so when the idea came, when Neil Armfield contacted me to work, he said, I want to get you and Elena Valentine to create lyrics to an oratorio to talk about the event. And I was terrified, because I've not done anything like that before, but I knew Elena's work and I knew I wanted to work with her. I knew something of the story, and I thought it's an important story to tell. And it's been one of the great collaborations of my life, because they trusted me. Music, I absolutely adore music. I've all my life, and it is a continuing inspiration. But to actually be with a composer, to actually how music works, it feels like I've got this new language, and what happens is now, in our working lives, we translate the experience of learning that language into the work you and I do as writers. I think that's like, so when I have been blocked, it's actually, I'll go to the art gallery and I will have, I will see a work of art and think about what I am experiencing, my relationship to it. And of course, film is one of the, film keeps, nourishing my imagination.
I want to ask each of you now about the connection between creativity and the natural world. That seems to be something that is really important to both of you. Christos, with you, let's start with you, because in your book it becomes something a bit more than that. So 7.5 to me reads like a hymn to nature and the beauty of the natural world. You, or the protagonist, is based in this beautiful cottage on the south coast, regularly throwing yourself in the ocean, looking at the stars, looking at the sky, observing the animals. And you talk about in this book, or the protagonist does, the relationship between creativity and the sensual. And you say, there is a vital connection between the beauty I am seeking and the pleasure I've been trying to find again in my writing. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
I think it's really... and again, it's through the luminous solution, Charlotte, that it is so... So when I think of it, the question, Nicole, it's like learning again how to breathe properly, right? So in order to remind myself this is the work I do, actually, yeah, it's akin to prayer and it's akin to meditation, And I think if I had not, I keep going back to Damascus because I think the previous book did have a huge influence on me because it was about the sacred. So it was, and I'd been so nervous about the sacred and wondering if, it's a very hard thing to do in a secular age to talk about the sacred. And it was a reminder that there is something to the ineffable, to the world that you have to be conscious of and respond to. And one way you respond is through the body, right? That's why I'm talking about breathing. That we live in a digital age, right? The novel that wasn't working, Resentment, was, and I just kind of only realise it now, I think, is it wasn't working because it was based on a contemporary politics. So to get an understanding, I had to be on Google all the bloody time, and I wasn't breathing properly. I wasn't walking and smelling the world. I wasn't conscious of how things were moving, how my body was moving in the world. I don't know if that makes sense, Charlotte, but I think that's part of what the writer in 7.5 is trying to understand, and why he keeps putting the phone away. It's about, I'm not being a Luddite, I'm not saying that there isn't an incredible opportunities that have come from this technology, but I find that it sometimes deadens my senses.
You both interestingly use the same word.
To talk about it, you both use the word poison. So
your protagonist, Christos, I think he only looks at his phone twice a day. He turns the internet off so that he can work. He talks about the need to just deaden that white noise. And Charlotte, you use almost the same expression. You say that world, spending too much time online and in social media, is poison to the inner world. Would you like to talk a bit about that, and also come back to the earlier question about the relationship between the natural world and creativity?
Yeah, I didn't realise I used the word poison, which seems a bit melodramatic now, but it did. And when I talk about being too much online, it's not just the online stuff is poisonous. My online self feels icky, sort of. So I was on Twitter for 9 years and I loved it. I was completely addicted to it.
And I made really good friends, and there was so much that was great about it. But I, over time, found my Twitter self, it made me sick in the end, and I just had to get off it altogether. And it was to do with losing my own privacy, like giving my privacy away, to the point that when I was sitting down to write alone without Twitter or anything, I could hear commentary on the sentence that I just wrote. And it was my own commentary, but it was also other people's commentary of, oh, could you believe, And that was very poisonous to my ability to work.
You said in the book that it made you
take less risks as a writer.
Yeah, because I was always thinking, that won't go down well with... And it wasn't the particular people, but, there's a very... I think there is a kind of... slightly puritanical, sanctimonious kind of vibe that can develop on social media. And I was I'm just continually grateful that there was no social media when I was 20, because I would have just been the worst practitioner of this, hunting people down, and I would have, out of kind of an attempt to develop my own place in the world, I would have latched on to the nearest possible tribe and gone in there, and I'm just so lucky that I couldn't, but it started to erode my ability to think my own thoughts until they were strong enough to share them, and I still feel like that. I have to break away, go private, and that's one of the many, many things I love about 7.5 is it's just the most perfect sort of portrait of what it's like to write fiction, because the narrator is in this house alone, having brought in these boundaries of time and space, goes for a walk, sees a young man, thinks, that young man can be my character, but also that reminds me of this thing when I was a child, and that reminds me of this thing, and there's that starfish, and it's this beautiful kind of absorbent state. And there is something about being too much online that it puts something between me and that openness, I suppose, that ability to have the aerial just buzzing every time you see something. Somehow it does get deadened, and I love technology. Like, I am every bit of gadget, whatever, I've got it immediately. I love all that stuff, but it's taken me a long time to learn that I have to be very careful with it. And the natural world is partly, it's so important because it isn't digital. That's one big thing about it, but also that the perspective shift. It's not human scale. I often write at a place on the Central Coast in New South Wales, and I look out and there's just water and hills and then these big cliffs, and they've been there for millennia, and I'm just like this little nothing there. That's a really healthy perspective shift to have when you think, I'm writing my book, it's so important. And then you look out the window and go, none of that stuff knows that or cares I'm writing a book, and it doesn't matter, in the scheme of the planet, it doesn't matter what I'm doing, and that's very healthy, I think.
I want to ask you both about what you write about. Christos, in 7.5, the protagonist makes it very clear that what he really wants to write about in this novel, Sweet Thing, is beauty. The protagonist says he no longer wants to write about politics or race or gender because, he says, I'm tired of being angry all the time. And then at other points in the book, he describes how disillusioned he is with both sides of politics. I'm wondering if that narrator is expressing feelings that you have. Is that how you feel? Because for many years, obviously, those are the things that you've written about: gender, race, politics. Is that how you feel now? Tired of being angry all the time, disillusioned with both sides of politics, wanting to write now at this time of your life about beauty?
There is a conscious choice that I'd had in writing 7.5 to say, I'm going to name the character Christos. I could have, I don't name the partner Wayne, I'm Simon, so that's kind of the first moment where anyone who knows me going, yes. So is this biographical or is it something else? Charlotte, you use the word puritanical in the culture, and I think that, yes, that is something that I do share with the character of Christo in the book, is a sense of where, because beauty, if you take it seriously, is not just the anodyne or the pretty. Beauty is also the terrifying. It's that moment when you describe looking out the window and going, this has been here for millennia and it does not care about me. It's not a benevolent nature. It is completely indifferent to me. I disappear in that knowledge. There's terror in beauty as well. But that is what led us to do what we're doing, right? Through the books we read, through the films we saw, the first music we fell in love with, right? So, of course, I love pop. I love pop, kind of. In my first novel, I have the character has I Want You Back playing constantly on a A-side of a tape, right? I actually think that's a great art, but it's the moment I remember, and we were talking about it in the green room, talking about, you asked Nicole about brothers and sisters, and I've got a brother, John, who I love, but I also grew up with my cousin Vicky really close, and she was a couple of years older, and she introduced me. I still remember this. I was in high school, and she'd bought a copy of Joy Division's Closer, and I hadn't heard anything that kind of going clank, clank, clank in my head, and I thought I'm going to just follow this because I want to I want to understand it, because I think there's going to be something really important in understanding that. And I found something beautiful, but I had to work to find the beauty. I don't know where I'm going. I'm just trying to say that it felt like I lived in an age where the beauty was no longer something we cherished as artists. Now, that's a broad statement, and I know it's not true for everyone. It's certainly not true for you. But it felt like the commentary in the digital world didn't care about beauty. And that's why I just felt like I wanted to say, that's what we do. Those emotions I just described about first listening to Joy Division are what I think art is.
Charlotte?
But I also feel like you've earned that. That if a writer starting out said, I only want to write about beauty, I'm not interested in politics, I'm not interested in the state of the world or society or holding a mirror up or anything like that, I just want to write about beauty, I would think, great. But that's not all there is. Whereas you coming to write about beauty now, it's like with this huge sort of freight
of all the really powerful work that you have done in exactly examining all those things that we have to examine. And I think sometimes books are reactions against your own previous work. Like when I wrote The Weekend, I just wanted to write something funny. I'd just written The Natural Way of Things, which was, for people who don't know it, a very kind of grueling book about misogyny, and it was hard. It was really hard. And it's like when you wrote Dead Europe and then you wrote The Slap, right, as a kind of antidote, not knowing it would then go ballistic. But, you go through sort of cycles and phases, and but I was so excited when I read the beginning of that and said, I want to write about beauty. I was like, oh, this is so thrilling, from Christos, because it's you doing it, because you've been, scary Christos.
Political
in the past,
Christos.
Political Christos. To me, that was very exciting, and it was a huge risk, an artistic risk to say I don't care about politics anymore. I'm pretty sure you do care about politics.
And it's clearly not true even within that book itself.
Yeah.
It's just that it's not capital. I use capital gender, capital sexuality, capital race. I mean, I think you'd have to do a deliberately a reading of bad faith to go that this isn't, that I don't care about politics in this book. I remember, because Nicole, you were asking about rage, and that what you described just then, Charlotte. I remember when I read The Weekend and was so excited because because I adore the novel, but also I felt that whiteness, and you're right. It's these books that came out of rage too, and it was to your question about rage.
There's something else, sorry to interrupt you, there's something else about when you write a certain
kind of book, so you spend all the years writing the book, and then you spend, if you're lucky, a couple of years talking about the book, and then over that time, the publisher of every other book like that book sends it to you and asks you to do stuff with it. So you're so after The Natural Way of Things, I received in the
post every book about assault of women, rape of women, the misogyny, all these great books, but I was just like,
I've done my time with this immersion in that material. And of course I know why people were sending me those books, and a lot of them I read and a lot of them were fantastic, and some of them I did, blurb and whatever, but it's kind of, it's decided that that's the kind of writer you are, so, it's very liberating then to just go, I'm stepping out of all of that and I'm going to be a funny writer or a writer of, landscape beauty. Or porn, if you're Christos. And I think that's really one of the great things about 7.5 is that it's a statement of, it's a kind of claim for the absolute jurisdiction of the artist. And that's a phrase that I heard said by Rosalie Gascoigne, the fantastic visual artist you will all know. And she said, I have absolute jurisdiction over what I do. And that is crucial. And that's, I guess, one of the things that the online world can start to erode your sense of your own absolute jurisdiction as an artist. And I think it's utterly essential that artists retain that no matter what the outcome, you know.
And then, you know, actually, there is that thing too. You receive all this stuff, and then there's this expectation in the world where you get, you know, Christos, can you write about climate change? Or Christos, can you write about cancel culture? Or Christos, can you write about the... and it's like, don't get me. Like there are
because you're not a commentator, you're an artist. And there's a difference that it's quite hard to... It's hard to say that because you want to contribute, and you're also very grateful that people ask for your thoughts. But for me, I was very clear after the Natural Way of Things that I was not a commentator on feminism because I'm not. I want to be an artist.
And it's the same thing.
I mean, it is for me. Non-fiction is much harder to commit to, because one, I'm not a commentator. I'm not a journalist. No one needs to hear me on Russia and Ukraine. You need to hear people who know what is going on. You need to know people who know the bloody language. We don't have enough of that. And so when I have done non-fiction, it's because I think, okay, maybe I wrote a piece on rage for the monthly, and I did that because I'd come back from a southern Europe that had been smashed by the debt crisis. And actually that was the first time, it hadn't happened to me, it didn't happen in Australia, but I suddenly went, oh my God, this is history and this is creating something quite dangerous underneath. So I felt like I could try and say something about that, but I sweated in a different way to when I write fiction, in writing non-fiction, because I felt the responsibility that I can't do the play, which I love in being a fiction writer, with 7.5, to go, is it Christos or is it something else? With this one, I had to be serious. Like I had to, the authority of truth was a different kind of authority when it came to an essay in the monthly.
Yeah, but also when you're writing that kind of thing, you kind of can't then turn around to yourself and say, actually, that's all bullshit, what I just said to you. And I think as an artist, one of the...
Well, as a fiction writer, I guess, one of the important things is really questioning yourself, and always thinking, maybe I'm wrong about this. And when you're writing about climate change or, and I've certainly done some of those pieces, and I really try not to do them anymore, but I sort of feel like I've got to make an argument here for something, and I can't have those doubts that I can have in the fiction, because then I lose my argument. So I've got to sort of shore everything up and make it a lot more certain than I am about anything. I mean, I'm certain about some things, like this government has got to go. That is, but me saying that, big deal. It doesn't mean anything, me saying that. But so I'm certain about that, but I'm not certain about nearly everything else. And to be a fiction writer and sort of placed in a position of commentator, like even me saying that then, that was kind of pretty self-indulgent, But it's important to recognise that in yourself, I think. And you can do it in fiction. Years ago, I watched an interview with Jimmy McGovern, who wrote that series Cracker. It was on a million years ago. And he was talking about making drama, and he said you have to constantly attack your own cause. And he was making that sort of docudrama about the dock workers, I think, about a strike. And the people in the show were saying, there was a scab, worker, and they said, well, he's evil. And he was like, no, he can't be evil in this. And they were saying, but he was. And he was saying, it doesn't work in drama. That's a cliche. You have to he's got to be a human being and a scab. And it was very hard for people to understand. But that's why I love writing fiction, is that that's what it's for. I feel.
Exactly. That's what's exciting about reading. Like this, we're writers, but we're also readers. I'm bored by books that tell me this is the bad person, this is the good person. That's not how our lives are. And because I'm really glad, like you, Charlotte, if Twitter had been around when I was a young pup, I would have been awful. I would have been so self-righteously condemned.
We would have been awful together.
Yeah, but and because I was a part of the, I was a young activist. I was part of, far left groups, and I think I've said it. I may have said this to an audience here, but I remember a wonderful older woman, and I'm very young. I'm not even 18 yet, saying, "You like pleasure too much to be good at politics," and that stayed with me because that's something interesting, and I think what does make I really like that friction of art and politics. Not that, of course, we care about things and we write it, but I want that friction to remain. Yeah. I don't want them to be comfortable bedfellows at all, because that's when we do our best work, I think.
And that's where you discover things, in that space between certainties. And I think I bang on about that a lot in my book, that the place where art happens is that joining point of opposing things. I've just suddenly thought of something else in 7.5 when the character Andrea says to Christos in the book, well, you can't write about beauty, it's not your area and you're not talented enough, which was like, dagger. And but then she's talking about her own political anger, and eventually she says, but I don't know who I would be without my anger. And that was so moving, because I feel like a lot of us feel like that, and anger. I've got a chapter on anger in my book, and it's about how useful it was as fuel for me in writing The Natural Way of Things, but staying in that state is not possible for me. And staying in that state and creating something would not be possible.
And you talk about tempering it with
humour, Charlotte, as well. Both of you talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I think humour's really important.
I'm writing a book now that I'm feeling like it's one of the things that's wrong with it is it doesn't have that lightness. And when I talk about humour, it's not jokes, but it's a lightness. And that's what nature does too, I think. Brings in that sudden swerve in perspective that, it's like the sun comes out. That changes the mood of something in a book. I'm just rambling now.
No, I think that was that chapter on anger is, I think, it's really important, because it's not like we don't get angry, right? But to live in that anger of when you write that way of things, like to live in that, right? It tears you apart. And I think you have to, you were scared, you said you were scared of me, Charlotte, because there was like the angry young man, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be that in the world. I was, but it wasn't a particularly healthy.
Really.
Yeah, but it also isn't healthy long term to be in that rage, right?
Yeah, and the
awful thing is that we're allowed to choose to let go of it, because we're rich and we live in Australia and we're white and we're educated and we have resources. And the people that I really feel for are people who cannot be released from their anger, because there is the justice has not been done, and I feel that must be a terrible thing to live with and impossible to get out of, so I'm aware of it.
Sorry, Charlotte, to interrupt there, but yes, that's absolutely, that's absolutely important, right? But what the digital world at the moment does is go, we're going to just take that anger and we're going to amplify it. And we're not going to, I worry that, there is no care of solidarity for people anymore to go, actually, you also need solace. We need to find ways to have peace, even if it's for 1 hour a day. Otherwise, you're going to die. And
I agree with that. I also, I just read that book, Stolen Focus by Johann Hari, which I know there's lots of apparently problems with the research, but a lot of that is about the technology companies designing it to keep us angry, because that's what keeps you scrolling. And it's not a moral thing, it's just like you need to stay there, so the ads keep, we keep getting advertising revenue. That stuff that makes you angry makes you stay in there to express your anger. If it was just beauty, you might walk away from it, Anyway, that's a whole area that I know nothing about, so...
But I do think that there is a link. I mean, there's so many links, to your book and mine. And one is, clearly we talk about this, we think about this. This is, it's not... politics is important to us, but there is a kind of wanting to remember beauty and joy and pleasure. And so you and I are both in different ways, it feels in this book, going, does it have to be so puritanical at the moment?
Or that you're allowed to have joy.
Yeah.
That if you are lucky, if you're lucky enough to see some joy in front of you, you're allowed to have it. And I think, the Andrea character is the sort of person who thinks you're not entitled to that because of all the horror. There's so much horror. We all know that. We all feel it. But I think it's really important to say we are also allowed to have that joy.
Yes.
Because it's a life force, right? And it's a force that can help you then work to address the other stuff. It's romantic, I know. But...
I wish we could keep this conversation going for another couple of hours. We probably need to start to wrap it up now. We've got time for a couple of questions, so I think we'll say the first two people to the microphone. Go. Yes.
Hey, Christos.
Oh, Julian! Old man's eyes.
Same. In the last part of your presentation and discussion, you were talking about rage and anger and solidarity, and it made the word comrade leap off the page for me from the title, Comrades in Words. So I just wondered if you could both comment on what the word comrade means to you and where that meaning comes from.
Beautiful question.
So it's a difficult word in one way, because it's tied to a particular political history to do with communism, right? Which is part of my heritage in this world. And I was actually thinking about it. I was so excited walking up, because I'm staying in Franklin Street, walking up to here to meet Charlotte and Jane. Is maybe fellowship is another, a word that comes closer to what I'm feeling, because I've been, in its best, comradeship means that we're in a struggle together, and I think I want to save that element of that word. I think it's really important. So, yeah, I've got to tell you, I wanted to say this to you, so I'm going to say it in front of all of you. So, a week and a half ago, and it comes from that question, I'd met up with some people I haven't seen for over 30 years maybe, right? Or 25 years. And we were all involved in a group called IPNA, which was Greek Communist Youth. So it was it was an arm of the Greek Communist Party in bloody Melbourne, and and we were righteous and we were angry and we were, but it was lovely meeting up again with these people. As I said, some of them I haven't seen for so long, and a lot of them were Greeks, and they had spent a lot of time in Greece, and we got into really passionate arguments about Ukraine, about art, about football, I came away and I said to Wayne the next morning, what I did not hear from any of those people was the phrase, "You can't say that." They may have said, why did you say that, or "I don't believe that." And I feel like at the moment in my culture, people are saying a lot, "You can't say that." And when I'm with Charlotte, she never says that to me. I think that's what that's part of fellowship and comradeship for me.
I think on that note, sadly, we'll have to
To wrap up, thank you both so much, Charlotte and Christos, for a fantastic conversation.
Thank you, everybody. Lovely to be here again.
Luckily for all of us, Charlotte and Christos are now heading over to the signing tent to sign their two absolutely amazing books. I recommend that you all grab yourself a copy of each and go and get them signed. They're two of the most beautiful books around at the moment. Thank you for being here.